Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Kaneshi Hart is a born entrepreneur. After several years in the corporate world, events conspired to send her off on her own. She is currently the host of the podcast Coach Up and is expanding her reach into corporate consulting. Her story is about risk, reward, and wisdom. Please welcome Kaneshi Hart to Bump in the Road. Kanesha, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Thank you for having me. I am excited to be here and honored, actually, to be able to tell about one of the bumps, I guess, in my road and how that bump is turning into a curve. I think that the last time we talked, when we first met, I was sort of in transition, and I really feel like I'm still there, but with a little bit more wisdom and a little bit more direction. And so where is there? My story starts with about 3 years ago, really, 5 years ago, actually, because we're in 2023. I cannot believe we're about to be in 2024 at the time of this recording, right? And so 5 years ago, Pat, I was in corporate America, working my way up the ladder, thought life was amazing. I had an amazing manager / mentor, and I was in a role, Pat, where I was overseeing a large facility in another country, right, where I got to travel on a regular basis and was responsible for building the relationship with them. And it was a sales management leadership position, but really a vendor relationship position. And I loved it. And I had been blessed by God with that role because my manager or my mentor at that time had previously been my manager, had helped me to get to that point. I had taken his job before I moved into this role, and he had mentored me in my role before. And so it was just, it was one of those pinnacle, I think I'm on the corporate ladder. Life is going to be amazing. This is always going to be great. Well, Pat, as we all know, things don't always go great. So I started that role in 2018 and had it for about 2 years. In the midst of that, my manager for that role, so my mentor was the one who helped get me to that role, and then he actually was my colleague in that role, which he's still my mentor, amazing. But then I had a new manager, and Pat, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but have you worked for somebody else previously in your life?
Yes.
Have you ever had a manager who was amazing and then did a 180 and turned horrible?
No, I've just had horrible people.
Okay. So you've experienced
which is one of the reasons.
Half.
Yeah, one of the many reasons I took a non-corporate path. But anyway.
Right? It is such a catalyst. So my manager started amazing and then did a 180 and it turned horrible. It turned into a toxic environment, very difficult. And so by the time COVID rolled around and I worked in the hospitality industry, you sort of have that feeling, we're going through job cuts. I don't know if I'm going to make it, right? Like, even if they keep my division, my manager is likely not going to choose me over somebody else. It was just, an innate thought. Pat, I was right. Mm-hmm. And so I lost my job then, quote unquote, due to COVID, which, there were lots of people being laid off. So yes, the interesting thing about this was my second layoff in a year and a half, about 2 years, because prior to that, the reason I was in this role was because that wonderful mentor / manager at the time, I had taken his position, but they had been probably about 5 months, if that, closed our facility. And so I had moved into a new role. I was a senior leader. It was so much fun. And then they closed my facility. in the closing of that facility, it was how I got this new job because it was in the same area and the same company. But you would think, Pat, I now got laid off the first time. And then the second time, you would think I would get the message, right? You would think, okay, maybe something bad's just happening in your life. You're on a streak, or maybe there's something else you're supposed to do. I can be a little stubborn. So I didn't quite get that message. But I will back up really quickly and tell you, because I want your listeners to hear this. Pat, do you know about government benefits when jobs in the U.S. are sent overseas and outside of the country, the benefits that American citizens get? Are you familiar with any of this?
No, not at all.
Oh my goodness, I want to tell you really quickly.
Okay.
So the first time I got laid off when they closed my facility, and that job went away, and then I moved into the second job. The United States government will give individuals whose jobs are being shipped out of the country, they will give them amazing benefits to help them find new jobs. So for any of you all who are listening, who this is happening to or has happened to, you should check into this. You can get, first, the one that's crazy, Pat, is they will pay moving expenses for you if you move to like over a certain mileage. So if you have to move to find a new job. And when I say like crazy, ridiculous amounts of money, like they would pay you thousands of dollars to relocate just because you have to move to find a new job. I didn't even know this. Second, they will pay for you to go back to school. What? You can get another degree and they will pay for it up to a certain amount. I think it's like $30,000 a year or something like that. They also, I think, provide some kind of health insurance, I believe. I could be wrong on that, but there's just a ton of benefits. So anyway, I didn't know any of that. And now that I think back after the second layoff, I thought I'm going through that whole toxic environment with my manager, which he's a wonderful person. It just turned ugly for a moment. I thought back and thought, maybe I should have got that second degree instead of taking this job, right? Like you start to question, was I smart in taking this second opportunity? Okay, so then into 2020, I don't have a job. And I felt like, and now the whole 2020 year, right from March when we got the announcement that, okay, we are going to shut the country down, even though we didn't really shut down. We're going through COVID. I wasn't doing a whole lot of work because my facility that I was overseeing was really shut down as well. I mean, so I'm not doing a whole lot of work. So in that time frame, I should have been using that time to do something different. And I felt like the Lord was telling me, learn some new skills. And so I got my real estate license. It was great. And then in November of 2020, literally before I got laid off in December, Pat, this is just nothing but God. I was sitting on my couch and the Lord literally said to me, go learn how to trade in the stock market. Now, I had seen this woman I had seen her advertisements for months and just ignored it because it was like $2,500. And I was like, who's spending that kind of money for a course? And I was like, oh, it'd be nice to learn how to trade in the stock market because I had always looked at the stock market like was this big gorilla but not in a zoo, like standing outside of my driveway that wanted to come into my house. No, we don't know you. And I'm not trying to engage with you. I was just overwhelmed. But the Lord said, learn how to trade. Okay. So I was obedient and I bought this course to learn how to trade. So now I have a real estate license. I'm learning how to trade in the stock market and then I get laid off. So you would think, Pat, now I have these opportunities. I've got all this time on my hands. I'm going to get paid unemployment for a few months. I have a severance package. Okay. The Lord is telling me I have new plans for you. So we go through 2021 and I traded some money away. I sure did. And then I did some real estate. And when I tell you, Pat, I will never, Lord willing, ever sell to another person, another piece of real estate ever again in my life.
Why is that?
Oh, let me tell you. That is so great that you ask. So, have you bought a house in your life, Pat? Okay.
Yes.
When you bought the house, Pat, how many houses on average did you need to see before you made a decision?
For me, it's a lot. I look at both data, I look at market trends, and I look at a lot of houses. I'm I'm not the sort of customer where you can show me 3 houses and I make a decision.
Okay, Pat, you might be the reason why I will never sell real estate again. So, okay, well, maybe let me ask this. Do you at least, if you look at data, then you know how much you're willing to spend,
Mm-hmm.
you're set on that, and you know what you're looking for, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so still, I'll never do it again, but I might have been able to work with you. Pat, no. My sweet, wonderful clients, they were all sweet individuals, and I didn't have a lot, but we went to so many houses, Pat. And then when we would be at the houses after a few, then they would think, well, it's not what I want. So I need to figure out how to get more house, which means you have to make more income or you have to pay down debt. And that's not something that people can do typically overnight. But you still want to continue to look at houses that you may or may not be able to afford. And you want me to drive. And I live in Atlanta. For those of you all who are listening, Atlanta is in the South. We are spread out. You know, we like to spread our wings in Atlanta. So there's lots of area for us to visit. It's a lot of gas mileage. And I don't like to drive already. So we went to, Pat, no less than 34 houses. And do you know, this, again, wonderful, sweet, one particular client never bought a house. Never bought a house. I'm going to own that. I'm going to own that as my fault that I didn't find what they were looking for. But we needed to take a break because they needed to figure out how to pay off debt and increase income and all that so they could afford more house. And I decided that I wanted to afford my sanity. So I thought, okay, Lord, I have a real estate license, but I don't want to sell to anybody else. I have this new trading skill that I'm developing. But I have a long way to go because I will tell you, as I think anything does in life, trading reflects who you are, not who we think we are, not who we think we are. Right. So I think, I don't know about you, but Pat, I have this idea of who I am in my head. And then I have the reflection of my life as it is that actually tells me who I currently am. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. And there's a little tension, hopefully, between the two because that pulls you forward.
Yes, exactly. Because I know who I want to be. And I have to realize that where I am currently is a result of every decision that I've chosen to make up until this point. So where I imagine myself or who I imagine myself to be is based on the decisions that I would have made or I know I'm capable of making, but I haven't made those yet. And so trading does that because I didn't realize, oh, Pat, I didn't realize how greedy I am.
Oh, what an interesting insight.
So I played basketball in college. So I have a competitive edge. The competitiveness came before the basketball, but it shows up in basketball. And so I thought when I got into the stock market, that competitive edge was going to help me beat the market. For anybody who does any kind of trading or anything in the stock market, you can't beat the market. It's sort of like going to a casino and saying you're going to beat the house. Just not intelligent.
The reality is the market moves on inside information in huge volumes of money, and the average person is simply not privy to that.
Wisdom. Yes, ma'am. That is exactly correct. But we think we're smart enough to outmaneuver it, or at least I am. I did. And so in that, I would then make decisions in my trading, Pat, and then those decisions would not go well, and then I would lose money. And then I would make one decision that netted me a profit and thought I was brilliant. And I'm one of those optimists who thinks if I have one small success, which that's how success works, right? Like you build upon successes. Once you have a success, then it gives you the motivation and it gives you the confidence that I can do it again, right? Not good for me in trading because my success of that one small decision, so I could have one trade that actually netted a profit and it didn't even wipe out all my losses. But then I would have, well, let's say I have $1,000 in losses and I have $100 in gains. I think I'm about to make $10,000 in the next 20 minutes. Craziness. And that I understood later to become greed. And I would be greedy and I would think, oh, the stock market moves so quickly. I can move quickly into my money making. Okay. So year one, I made some money. Year two, I lost a lot of money. And year three, we're about even. But I realized trading, even though the Lord told me to do it, Lord, I'm not doing well in this. So, Pat, you know what I decided to do? I decided to go back to work. hmm I decided to get another job. So I was off work, 2021, trading, doing real estate. And so I said, I need to get back to a full-time job. We need some income going. Even though I feel like, I'm supposed to still trade, I'm supposed to be in investing in real estate, but I need some income. So I went back to work. And Pat, I want to tell your listeners, when you see red flags, don't like paint them white or green in your head. No. Note the color of the flag. Okay. So I got this job and I asked the Lord, I said, Lord, this is Pat again. I'm still a new baby Christian. And so I'm still learning. I say new baby Christian. I'm 3 years old. I don't know if my fellow believers would call me a baby anymore, but I, in my infancy, said, Lord, give me a sign. And if my job is 20 minutes from me, that means I'm supposed to take it. Because I didn't feel like the Lord was saying, I felt like the Lord had pulled me out of corporate America so I could do whatever he wanted me to do. But, in my humanness and in my bank account reflection, I thought, I need to go back to work. And so I said, this is God if my job is 20 minutes from me. If I get a job 20 minutes from my house, because again, I live in Atlanta. Anybody who lives in Atlanta knows about Atlanta. Our traffic is horrible. Normal 20-minute drive is 50 minutes on a good day in traffic. So I said, even with traffic, 20 minutes. Pat, I applied for a lot of jobs. Interestingly, I had an interview with a company I didn't remember applying for. Come to find out later, they were doing a lot of recruiting because they were growing. So they reached out to me. I interviewed. They loved me. I thought I liked them. It was 20 minutes from my house. I said, oh, it must be the Lord. I'm going back to work. Now, the red flag, Pat, is a week prior to me going to starting, my manager at that time called me to explain to me the issues with my colleagues and who she was planning to remove from the company. Yeah.
And this is before you've even started working.
Yes, ma'am. Pat, do you see any problem? Does that raise a red flag for you at all?
Oh, I think there's a little bit of concern there.
Just a little bit. So I thought, now, again, because I wanted to paint the flag white or green, I thought, no, I'm supposed to go because Jesus answered my prayer. It's only 20 minutes. Jesus wasn't. I don't think he was. I think that was in my head. I recognized if I have a manager who's talking to me about one, my peers, and two, about problems that I should not be involved in, even before I get there, that's not the best behavior. But I thought, I'm going to take it. And so I did. Pat, job number 3 in 5 years of being let go from. And not even let go. This wasn't even a nice layoff, of being fired from. That happened with that job. So 8 whole months later, I'm removed from the position because the company is doing things that are illegal. I've reported it. Nobody is doing anything about it. And so I continue to report it up the chain. But they're more interested in protecting the bottom line than they are other people. And unfortunately, because I wasn't on board with that, I was not conducive to their success. So they needed to fire me. I didn't even say let go. Fired. They fired me. Yep. Brought me in, laid me off, gave me a week sabbatical to put everything together and fired me. Pat, me, you've only met me, but oh my goodness, you see how amazing I am. They fired me.
Actually, I do think you're really amazing. And obviously the job wasn't the right place for you because you had a conflict of ethics. And that's something that if you're an ethical person, it is, I'm going to say it's almost impossible to live with that long term.
It is. Even short term, right? Because
I think so too. Well, if you have a house, you have a mortgage, you have all these things, you can put up with a lot up to a point.
Yeah. My thought process was, and it still is, I don't have to answer ultimately, for me, I don't have to answer these people. Like I have to answer to Jesus. I have to answer to my higher power. And every time I make a decision to allow something that I know is not right, I am discrediting what I say my faith is in him. And so it started small, and it started with the hope of I can report this and there will be changes. But as I continued to do so and there wasn't, then I continued to need to make waves. And so when that termination happened, Pat, I had to sit back and realize that it had been 5 years and I had been laid off or fired from 3 jobs. I don't think that's a norm, right? And hopefully not, but not typically.
Maybe not. But I mean, I haven't known you a long time, but you really are an outstanding individual. I mean, the idea that you're getting laid off, it's like, what is the lesson in this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. And that's what I had to figure out. And so I finally came to the conclusion. Oh, I will say, because I do tell people this, unfortunately, that company filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy and they're no longer in business, which unfortunately makes sense when you're doing things that you shouldn't be. So that was all I think planned to show me that when the Lord told me in 2020, start trading, he was telling me, I don't want you to work for anybody else. I have plans for you. Getting my real estate license in 2020, my father, I had made a commitment. I have a minor in real estate. So in my degree that I got years ago, I have a minor in real estate. And when I got that in college, my dad asked me to get my real estate license. And I promised him I would. I won't tell you how many years since I've been out of college. No need for us to talk about age here. But I remember that I had made that promise and had not kept it. And so now there's an opportunity where I'm keeping a promise to my father and I'm getting my real estate license. And so I really feel like the lesson that I was learning, Pat, was the Lord was saying, I have something else for you to do. And it involves you not being under the time constraints and the direction of somebody else. But Pat, this is the challenge with working for yourself. It takes discipline and it takes direction. And you have to know you have to do one and you have to know what the other one is. And we don't always know, right, the entire road, but I've got to know at least what the next step is. And so for me, I was like, okay, Lord, I'm gonna trade. We're not doing real estate. We'll do investment real estate. And that's what originally, what I've always wanted to do was investment real estate. But we'll trade and then we'll see what's next. And so I began to do substitute teaching and to just, which allows me flexibility. I can work when I want to, just to make sure there was some income coming on. But then I just began to say, okay, Lord, what do you have me to do? And so Pat, in 2022, it's either 2021 or 2022, I was in church and the Lord told me, start a podcast. I was like, okay, I'm going to wait for you to tell me who I'm going to start that podcast with. And so in a year goes, again, I can't remember if it's 21 or 22, but I think it was 21. A year and a half goes by, I got nothing. And then in January of this year, so that we're in 2023, I get the very clear message to start a podcast for coaches. Now, Pat, I'm not a coach. Don't coach anybody. I did coaching in when I was in leadership positions, and I coached my team as a manager and that type of thing. But the coach of like a basketball coach or a leadership coach or a executive coach, I don't do any of that. And so I thought, no, this is my conversation with the Lord. Jesus, I trade. Wouldn't you prefer that I talk to people who are traders? Because then I could learn from them while doing the podcast. I got silence. Okay. So I decided I would do what I heard. So I started this podcast for coaches. And it's for 6 and 7 figure coaches and how they've built their business to that level. And it's for coaches who are in the industry to help them learn how to build their business to 6 figures. Because I've heard the stat, I've yet to find it, but I keep hearing it, so it's got to be somewhere, that the majority of coaches, like 95% of coaches, only make like $5,000 a year in their coaching. I'm like, yeah, I wish I could see her facial expression.
Well, that's not sustainable, obviously.
It's not, right? But
And chances are
often,
your expenses are more than $5,000.
absolutely. But with anything, right? Like we won't grow unless we learn, right? You can do it. We can do a lot of effort, but if the effort doesn't have direction, sort of like I said, direction and discipline, then we're not going to get anywhere. So they need some direction, and so there are tons of resources. We live in the information age, but I felt like this was the Lord was saying, provide an example of coaches that tell how they built their business, so that other coaches can start to build their business the same. And so in February, I started this podcast, still continuing the trade. And over the last, so it first dropped in February. So over the last 11 months, oh my goodness, 11 months approximately, I have met with amazing people. I have been introduced to individuals who are just doing great things, sort of similar to, individuals that you talk to. Whereas you're learning about the life stories, and I get to learn about the entrepreneur stories and how people have gone from not knowing anything, not even knowing where their direction was, to being able to now help people to develop in a space where they're now an expert. And it has just been truly fulfilling almost, because I feel like there's still more for the Lord to do for me in that space. But so far it's been fulfilling. And now I have the direction in which I'm going. What I will talk about, Pat, is the discipline. And so you've had your podcast for how long?
I'm in my 4th year.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And you do one every week?
Every week.
Okay, so I'm just curious really quickly. How every week, no seasons, every single week you drop one?
Yes.
What's your secret to your discipline to do that for 4 years?
Wow. It's a bit of a curve, if you will. I mean, you start off, you don't know if it's going to work. You don't know if you're going to get anybody to come on. You really are, at least I did not know what I was getting into. And people talk to me about starting a podcast often, and I tell them it requires an enormous amount of discipline. You really have to have an internal motivation to be passionate about what you're doing, or you will not be able to sustain it. And you both have to have kind of a workflow, and yet it has to be flexible because technology changes, maybe your host, or recording host or whatever changes. So while you have to have a methodology, you also have to always be out there looking and be willing to change it all. So I don't think people realize really what goes into podcasting. I mean, I have 80,000 followers across platforms. I post every day on Facebook. I post on Instagram, Twitter, what else? YouTube. I write for Substack. So all of this, kind of comes together, but you can't necessarily measure each component. It's difficult, to tell you the truth, particularly as you're setting goals and you're looking to grow. How do you measure it? Do you measure it by website traffic? Do you measure it by social media? The download stats that you get on your website aren't all that accurate because your website can be on. No, I'm sorry, the podcast download stats aren't all that accurate because it can be distributed in lots of different places and ways. So it's a very flexible environment, and yet, just as you're saying, you need direction, and you absolutely have to have discipline.
Yeah. Kudos to you, because 4 years doing something where you're constantly having to reach out, especially for guests, and market it, right? As you talked about, posting on social media every day and on Facebook every day, reaching out through email. It takes a lot, and there are days. Okay.
Yes.
There are days
well, and actually,
that we don't want to do it.
No, I found this year finishing my first book, I was really exhausted afterwards, and now I'm trying to get geared up to get the next one out next year, and it takes a massive amount of discipline, I think, to go after these combined creative business goals.
Yes. Congratulations on your book. What's the book?
Thank you. Bump in the Road, 15 stories of courage, hope, and resilience.
I love it. Did you bring the stories of some of your guests to life in the
Oh,
book?
yeah. Actually, the first draft for the book was twice as long as the end book ended up being, because there were so many stories. It was so hard to cut them. But I had to get it down to a manageable size, which I
Mhm.
did. The audio book should be out in another week or two. And then it's rinse and repeat. But the thing that's difficult about the next book is that the format's going to be a little bit different. The first book, I told some of my stories because people I thought would want to get to know a little bit about who is this woman.
Mhm.
But my future books, and the next book is Bump in the Road, Strong Women, I really want to just focus on my guests. And I have so many extraordinary guests
Mhm.
that it's just taking a lot of time to get that direction really set. Once it's set, you're golden. You know where you're going. But it takes
Mhm.
a lot of thought up front to generate that direction and to be able to see it. So as you're talking about direction and a work ethic and everything else, none of this is in perfect alignment. It
Yeah.
shifts, it moves. You may have to move forward without direction for a while until you gain
Mhm.
that direction. So it's a very uneven process, if you will.
Yeah. I like what you just said. You have to move forward until you gain the direction. And I've heard that so many times and I've thought, or some a variation of that, and I've thought, so what do you do? Like, what are you doing in that meantime? And for me, it is, okay, I know I'm supposed to do a podcast. Where is it growing to? I don't really know the direction that it's growing to. I just know, okay, God said do the podcast, I'm doing the podcast. And so it's just every single day getting up. Do I need more? Do I need to schedule guests? Do I need to post and market the podcast? Do I need to edit? Right? What are the steps that go along with what I'm doing right now? And to continue to do that until something else reveals itself. How do you find doing without direction? What do you do in that space?
I have enough faith that it will come together because I've looked at my own creative process over time. And I know that I need time to just think, to spin around a little bit, to do nothing, perhaps. I need that time for my creative process to come together. And I know that because I'm not doing anything. It's just that the progress may not be apparent on the surface, but it's very busy under the surface. And as that coalesces, things come together, and I know my energy will flow again.
Mm, you're right. That takes faith. Yes. And I think that's where I am now. I am in the midst of, I'm on a path, which is so nice, right? To know that, okay, the Lord told me to do this podcast and to grow it. And He's opened doors that I wouldn't have thought. I'll give you an example. This is I don't know if this is a funny story because it wasn't funny at the time, Pat. Maybe it'll be funny now, but it was annoying at the time. One of the doors the Lord opened is in the midst of doing the podcast. About fall, I thought part of growing podcast is to also be on other podcasts, which is why, again, thank you for the honor of being here with you. And so I started reaching out and putting those feelers out and met this amazing woman named Angela, and she has a podcast called Empower Her Money. And when we did our podcast, Pat, afterwards, she said, you've given, and hers are short, they're like 15, 20 minutes. She said, you've given more value in our conversation than like a lot of the other conversations I've had recently. And so probably about a week later, maybe two, she sent me an email. And Pat, she invited me to come and speak at her inaugural conference that she was doing. Because podcasting is new to her. And so now she's growing her business. And she was doing a conference/workshop. It was a day full of women teaching them how to build their business. And she wanted me to come and talk about how to monetize a podcast. And so I was just so grateful to the Lord for that opportunity to open. And so I planned it. It was in November. And the funny part of the story is I planned to I went down on Friday. The event was Saturday. I was going to fly out on Saturday night. I was, it's one of those jet setters. Okay, this is in my head. Oh, you're so important and cool that you just go in for a day for your work and then you fly out. Like, okay. that's what in my head I was doing. So I was like, just going, coming back, get back to work on Monday. On Saturday night after our conference, many of the speakers stuck around to hang out and talk for a little bit. And I'm in Miami. You know, Miami is a fun town. And so some of the sweet speakers said, come with us. We're going to go hang out with some other people, and then you can get to the airport from there. My flight was at 10. I thought, oh, sure. This was about 7. Okay. At about 8:30, I was still sitting at the table thinking, oh, the airport's close. There's hardly any traffic in it. There wasn't when I came. At 9:30, Pat, when I decided I wanted to get to the airport for my 10 o'clock flight, needless to say, I didn't quite make it. The funny thing was, one, I decided to leave the ladies about 8:40. Okay, that's the first problem. The second thing was I called the first Uber. They couldn't find me. So, now you're counting minutes, right? Like you're down to the minute to make sure you get to the airport before the boarding door closes. Okay. So the first Uber couldn't find me. Okay, now we're sweating a little bit. The second Uber does find me, and I'm in Miami downtown, where they have this thing called bridges, where boats have to go under the bridge. Who would have known that when I get to the bridge, a boat needs to go through? Because when I got into the second Uber, of course, that I called, because the first one couldn't find me, I put it in and I'm calculating the time to the airport, and I've got time. Like, I'm in my head, I'm calculating, I'm going to be there in 14 minutes. I don't have to check a bag. I have TSA. I'll be through security in like 5 minutes. And then if I need to walk quickly, we don't need to sprint. If I need to walk quickly to the door, then I'll be on time. I'll be there 20 minutes before the door closes, because the door closes, I think, 15 minutes before the flight. I'm going to be good. Yeah, nobody anticipates the boat and the bridge that has to be lifted for the boat. So then, Pat, okay, there's still hope. We get through that. We get to the airport. We go through the airport, and Miami's airport has each of the airlines on the door. So you know exactly what door you go to. We didn't see my door the first time. So, okay, no worries. Maybe we missed it. We're going to just make a loop and come back. Unfortunately, Pat, my sweet Uber driver, and he was very nice, he missed the exit to make the loop. So we make a 10-minute loop. When I got into the airport, there was nobody at the counter. They had left me. Yes. So I spent a little more time in Miami than intended. Ended up having to spend an extra night and get a new flight, which is always so fun. It's not. That was my first time missing a flight ever. I will not do it again. But the whole point was, it was an amazing opportunity because the Lord has opened up doors for me to speak with individuals and to have more opportunity to share what I'm learning, similar to your book, right? Like, I'm getting to learn what I'm learning from my coaches, as well as in building this business with other people, as well as share other people's stories with them through the podcast. And so now, where am I? I'm building a podcast of amazing people who are changing the world, and the Lord is opening doors for me to change. And I think it's apropos because 5 years ago, when I was chasing a job, when I was chasing a paycheck, when I was chasing security, we were talking about security earlier before we actually got in here, I would never have thought that I would be in a place where every day is a risk, right? Every day is a risk of, am I going to be disciplined to get up, to talk to the people that I need to talk to reach out to people I need to reach out to put myself out there, to build something that I don't know what the Lord is going to do with, but walking by faith, I'm just going to do the work in the midst of it and trust, similar to what you said, that it is going to work out for good, not for me only, but for those who I'm supposed to impact and those whose lives I'm supposed to help in some kind of way. And so I now work for myself and not going back to corporate America. And okay, really quickly, I will tell you, and then I'm going to be quiet, Pat. This is how sometimes what our resolve is tested. And I think this is important for people to hear. So I still do substitute teaching, right? And so it allows me a little bit of part-time income as I'm still building the business. This year, the principal of a school that I substitute at offered me a job. And people would think, well, you should take that, right? Like you could take it, you could still do your business on the side. And it's that security that seems safe that is not necessarily in alignment with what the vision is. And I think it's important for us to know that it's important to be able to identify what we have to say no to in order for us to have the space to say yes to what we're supposed to. And so I had to say no to an offer for a full-time job because after being laid off 3 times or fired the last time, I know that corporate America is not where I'm supposed to be. Working for someone else full-time is not where I'm supposed to be. And so I have to trust that as I continue down this road of building this business with this podcast, that as I continue to build, the Lord will lay out the opportunities that He's already shown me and more so that I can continue to help the people that He's instilled for me to help. And so that's my story.
If you could rewrite your story, would you?
I am not one who lives with regret in decision making. What I'd like to do is learn wisdom. So to answer your question, I don't think so. What I hope is that one thing I wish would be different is that I would learn the wisdom quicker. I have a friend who she says she has the get it quick anointing, meaning when she learns a lesson, she gets it quick, right? She learns it, she applies it, she doesn't make the same mistake again. I have a tendency, as evidenced by my story of needing to be laid off 3 times in order for me to get the message that the Lord was saying, I'm trying to call you out of corporate America. I have a tendency to have to repeat some things before I actually learn them. So I wish I could learn the lesson quicker, but I wouldn't rewrite the story, I don't think.
Thank you for listening. I hope you'll support this podcast by becoming a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. It's your support that makes this podcast and website possible. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.